Bring in show music, please.
This is Squawk Pod, and I'm CNBC producer Cameron Costa. On today's episode, protests at Columbia have boiled over. The NYPD entered campus, making 100 arrests. Lawyer Jay Edelson has filed a lawsuit against the school on behalf of a Jewish student who says the learning environment is unsafe.
Kids who work their whole lives to get into one of the most prestigious universities in the world, and they can't go to class, and they're being forced off because they're Jewish. It's insane. This is America.
And Politico and Axios co-founder Jim VandeHei is watching the 2024 election.
People look back at Trump and they're like, I didn't, like, he might have said crazy things, but I don't know, it seemed like my taxes were lower and I was making more money.
Plus a Starbucks spill after a brutal quarter.
The prices now, I don't know how you feel about it. They were always high.
And cannabis on the way to an FDA downgrade.
I think our brains are always developing. Mine's developing this way now, I think.
Reverse.
Yeah.
It's Wednesday, May 1st. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We are live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernen and Andrew Ross Sorkin. And let's take a look.
They're willing to take on an extremely minor amount of risk compared to what the heroic people of Gaza are dealing with every single day.
Justice! And now it's become very clear. The students changed their strategy. They moved into Hamilton Hall. They're clearly trying to create echoes to 1968 and the anti-Vietnam War, anti-war protests. And now the NYPD is here. And so in many ways, this is the absolute worst case scenario.
Meantime, new overnight, police officers clearing protesters from Columbia's Hamilton Hall, which had been seized and occupied the night before. Dozens of pro-Palestinian protesters were arrested. Columbia's president has asked the NYPD to maintain a presence now on campus through at least May 17th to prevent further encampments or occupations. I don't know if you're watching any of the live coverage of it last night, but it was extraordinary just to watch the police going in there, taking these kids out. The protesters on all ends of it. It was really, it's unbelievable. And obviously this is spreading across the country.
Happened a little earlier in Florida. It didn't seem quite as jarring for some reason. They did it a little earlier. What I didn't realize was Hamilton Hall was the same building in the 60s. Mm-hmm. Same building that these protesters.
They're doing that intentionally.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, the DNC's in the same city. 68 too, in
Chicago.
In Chicago.
I would like to welcome everyone to Starbucks' second quarter fiscal year 2024 conference call.
Today's discussion will be led by Lakshman Narasimhan, Chief Executive Officer.
While these results do not reflect our strengths, our capabilities, or the opportunities ahead, we confront these challenges from a position of enduring strength.
This is remarkable to watch. I was listening to the analyst call last night. Shares of Starbucks plunging, earnings now of 68 cents per share, missing estimates of 79 cents, revenue $8.6 billion. That missed estimates of $9.1 billion. Same-store sales fell 3% in North America, and the company blaming poor weather and fewer customer visits to its stores. That's in the U.S. In China, comp sales down 11%. Executives said the recovery there was choppier than expected. The company cut its full-year forecast. But just to put a point on where we are, about $10 billion were shaved off of the company's market cap last night, based on where we're going to open, maybe actually more than that this morning. In total, if you look at when Lakshman took over from Howard Schultz, $30 billion has disappeared from the value of this company. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find that kind of shift in anything maybe but a technology company. In fact, it's hard to understand how much of this is an indication of what's going on in the broader economy and consumers stepping down from from one product to another. We saw what was going on with McDonald's.
Didn't happen with Chipotle's, though.
Chipotle levitates above everything. Or how much, though, we were talking about inflation. I would argue to you that part of the problem at Starbucks is that they actually raised prices too high. Remember, when everyone said, oh, we got to raise prices, the prices now, I mean, I don't know how you feel about it. They were always high.
Yeah.
But, you know.
They didn't need to raise it.
Well, no, I think they probably did need to raise them at some point. But then the question was, did they move too high? And now what do you do to actually keep up this kind of growth? So I think there's going to be a big test for Lakshman to figure out, you know, what's next. He talked about a lot of opportunities that he thinks exist, both in terms of trying to get more afternoon traffic. I mean, they sort of have a very interesting conundrum. They have too little capacity in the morning, meaning you go to most Starbucks, the line's too long. So they have no problem in the morning with pricing, with anything. Come the afternoon, they're now, you know, running all sorts of loyalty programs and things on the app to try to get people to show up in the afternoon. Weekend, now they're talking about opportunities to do overnight delivery for folks who want to get access to Starbucks. I mean, people who are working at hospitals and doing overnight shifts. So there might be all sorts of opportunities. He talked about that as a $2 billion opportunity that he thinks is not sort of baked into what the company does. But it's a very interesting sort of microcosm of what's happening in the economy.
The chart,
what may have happened with some of the
doesn't
pricing.
look that incredible to me. I mean, it was 128. It's going to be 70 or 80. I mean, Target, you know, stocks, which I guess your position in the past is that they're a great store of value as opposed to some other things. They move around. It may be valued at 100 billion one day. 6 months ago, might have been 130 billion. And you can find, it's not just technology stocks. You can find many, many stocks that have highs and lows that are 100% different, that are double, because that's the nature of the market.
If we take a longer look at this.
How far did Target go? You've been watching stocks for years. You know that I mean, Netflix was a technology stock, I guess you'd call it, but that went from 700 to under 200. Disney went from media conglomerate, brand name of all brand names, went from over 200 down to under, I mean, they have 50% moves on many, many stocks.
The dip that you're seeing right now, if this holds, this 12.5% drop, it would be the biggest drop that you've seen since going back to the beginning of the pandemic. You can see the chart when they actually started shutting stores down to do these things.
I'm amazed. It's still a $100 billion market cap.
Yeah.
Coffee maker.
But it's got the opposite problem of so many other fast food places, which all the other lunch and dinner places used to try and figure out how to make breakfast an active time so that you didn't have these empty stores. They're trying to figure out the opposite problem, which it'd be interesting if they could find a way to lure people in for this stuff.
And the question is, can they get Gen Z people in there, and can they get Gen Z people in there without coffee? So that was the other thing that was so interesting, which is, you know, they're talking about Gen Z.
Doesn't drink coffee?
They want energy drinks. They want teas. They want colds. They want ice drinks. So iced coffee obviously is one part of that, but you know they're developing other kinds of products and things. It's going to be very interesting to watch. In the meantime, shares of cannabis-related companies jumping yesterday. This after the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration taking a step towards reclassifying marijuana to a less dangerous drug category. Canopy growth rising as much as 79% during yesterday's session, and Tilray up 40%. Marijuana has now been classified with drugs like LSD and heroin. DEA could move it to a Schedule III classification with drugs like Tylenol with codeine, steroids, and testosterone. Change would remove additional taxes the cannabis companies have to pay and open up the industry to more banking and financial services. Any rule change would take months to take effect. After the proposal is published, there's then a 60-day public comment period. The proposal would then be reviewed by an administrative law judge. And my only comment on this is to take a walk around New York City and tell me what you think.
This morning
it's a different issue than, I know it's not about the strength of it, but there's sort of just a larger societal question.
And it is a societal question, and I'm not convinced that it's so great.
Not either. And then the access that it gives to younger kids below the age of 18 who have a much easier time finding it now than they used to.
It's not heroin, but it's only testosterone, or Tylenol with codeine can be a bad thing, I think.
You don't want people driving with Tylenol and codeine.
And you don't want people. It could lead you to some type of opiate addiction. But then again, I don't think it's not heroin, but I'm not sure it's way down here either. It can be its own problem for kids. And
if you're walking, look, when your brain's still developing, it's a big issue for that. And just the idea, like we all walk up and down the streets of New York City.
I'm high as a kite. I just walk through Times Square.
Well, you get high on
Just seeing you.
Being on that and being on TV and everything else, right? I think, but in brains, I think our brains are always developing. I mean, mine's developing this way now, I think.
Reverse.
Yeah.
Cheese will be next.
Coming up on Squawk Pod, the NYPD making 100 arrests overnight at Columbia. And one Jewish Columbia student is filing a lawsuit against the school. That student's lawyer, Jay Edelson, says Columbia failed to provide a safe learning environment for its Jewish students.
What's Egypt doing? They border on Gaza. Why aren't they letting people in? Should we divest from Israel? Great discussions. Part of the especially an academic experience. What you can't do, though, is incite violence and actually engage in violence, and that's what we're seeing.
We'll be right back. And we're back. This is Squawk Pod.
You're watching Squawk Box on CNBC. I'm Joe Kernen, along with Becky Quick and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
New York police now clearing a building last night at Columbia University that protesters had taken over the night before. This coming weeks after students began gathering to call for Columbia to divest from companies connected to Israel. Roughly 100 people were arrested. New York Mayor Eric Adams spoke to Morning Joe in the last hour.
We want the schools across the city to be clear that the property of the schools are for the students. More than just Columbia, it's more than what we saw at City College. This needs to be a clarion call for our country. These are our children, and we can't allow them to be radicalized like children are being radicalized across the globe.
Earlier this week, a Jewish student filed a class action lawsuit against the school for allegedly failing to provide a safe learning environment. It's a fascinating lawsuit that could have much larger implications. Joining us right now is Jay Edelson, the lawyer for that student. We should mention we've also reached out to the law firm representing Columbia and have not yet heard back, but it's nice to see you this morning. This is effectively a breach of contract lawsuit, which is to say that students effectively pay to go to school, and you're saying they can't.
They can't. Yeah, and I think I'm a lawyer. We always have to say allegedly, not in this case. They absolutely breached their contract. I don't even think Columbia is arguing otherwise. We've been talking to Columbia. We already did a court hearing yesterday, and they've agreed that they cannot maintain a safe environment. You've got kids who work their whole lives to get into one of the most prestigious universities in the world, and they can't go to class, and they're being forced off because they're Jewish. It's insane. This is America. That should not be happening.
And so you brought this case.
Yes.
You've gotten phone calls from all over the country. I imagine this is just going to be potentially the first of many lawsuits similar to this.
Well, we'll see. So, it's really interesting. You see universities dealing with it different ways, and I appreciate the mayor's comments. I think he's right. What we're going to see as this case develops and the facts come out, it's not just student protesters. It's really outside agitators. People who have much different agendas, who are not, what they're saying to the public is different than what they actually believe. So when you hear them talk and they say, we are calling for terrorist attacks on Jews, we're calling for terrorist attacks on America, that's not really coming from the students. That's coming from the outside forces. And that's what we're going to develop. And I think that's true in other universities as well.
When you say develop, you're going to develop in discovery.
Yes.
As this lawsuit progresses.
This case is moving quickly. We have asked for immediate injunctive relief. The court has been terrific.
What does injunctive relief look like in this case?
Injunctive relief means restoring the campus to safety so that all students can actually learn. They're in the middle of finals, and you've got a system where certain students aren't able to even go and take in-person finals, and other ones, the radicalized ones, own the campus. Less so now. We're glad the police finally came in.
What do damages look like in a case like this?
This case is not about money. This case is about let's restore some sort of order. This is a case we're handling pro bono. We are working with Columbia, and our goal is just let's restore sanity to the world. Let's have the adults in the room, and let's let our students come in.
Where do you land on the idea of free speech, protests on university campuses, and the like, and where the red line is on everything else?
Love free speech. I think that there should be more debate about was their reaction to the October 7th terrorist attacks. Was it proportional? Was it not? What's Egypt doing? They border on Gaza. Why aren't they letting people in? Should we divest from Israel? Great discussions. Part of the especially an academic experience. What you can't do, though, is incite violence and actually engage in violence, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing Jewish kids are being physically pushed off campus, and they're being told from leaders, especially at Columbia, that the goal is to actually kill Jews in America. That's not free speech.
So when did Columbia's administration go wrong? What was their first misstep? How have they not corrected since then?
Great question. So let's compare it to other schools like University of Florida. University of Florida, the second there started to be violent protests and illegality, they start suspending kids. Columbia has equivocated. Every 2 days, they've got a different view. It's, here's our ultimatum, and then the ultimatum happens, and then they go backwards. So even now, we appreciate they finally called the police in, which they needed to do. They should have done it weeks ago. But the question is, are they going to hold strong, or are they going to give in to demands that they're going to give amnesty to some of these kids who are calling for violence on fellow students? So that's where they went wrong. You got to be strong, decisive, and clear. Otherwise, you're just really furthering this.
Do you think they are going to call for amnesty? Is that the expectation you have, that they will say all these kids who they've suspended and expelled, forget it, you're allowed to come back in?
That's absolutely what the student groups are going to be asking for. And we saw Barnard College lifted all the suspensions right away. It sends the worst message. If we're very clear to the students on our campuses nationwide, you're allowed to. We want you to engage in free speech. You cannot threaten people. You cannot push people. You cannot attack people. If you do, you don't get to be at one of the best universities in the world.
Do you believe that Columbia's president should remain Columbia's president?
Yes. Yeah. We're not calling for the Columbia's president to resign. What we're asking is that Columbia's president does the right thing now.
What about the professors who are on the payroll of Columbia that have been engaged with these students as part of these protests?
Well, it depends. If they're engaged in free speech, then that's fine. But what we're hearing already is that a lot of the professors are engaged in potentially retaliatory actions. You've got a lot of students that are worried that their grades are going to suffer. We heard from one person who was getting an A in a class who somehow got a 0 on a test. That person happened to be Jewish. Those things have no part of the...
What do you think is going on here? Meaning, really? I mean, I think, look, I'm Jewish.
Yes.
What do you think is going on here? Where do you think that this anti-Semitism has it been here the whole time? Has it been under the surface? Is it these agitators have taken over the campus? Is it actually the students themselves? What do you think is really happening?
So, I mean,
I know it's a big question.
It is. I was a philosophy major. That might be too big a question for me. My answer is that I'm surprised at the amount of anti-Semitism that's been in America. It caught me off guard. And the second you give people an excuse to like really explain what their feelings are, I was at Columbia the other day, and the amount of venom they had to Jewish people was really scary. Not all the protesters. A lot of protesters are totally fine. But it's not just anti-Semitism. It's an anti-American sentiment as well.
That's been around, and it's been in mainstream media. Many people guilty of seeing people kneel at the anthem and wear pigs on their socks, and that all was fine until it got to the point where, I mean, this is serious now. And you can have a whole faction of the House of Representatives on the Democratic side that's called a squad that panders in exactly what you're talking about right now. And it's been out in the open, and they've been defended by Nancy Pelosi when she was Speaker. And these things have consequences when it goes unchecked. And this is where we ended up. And they don't want to hear that. And they're going to bring up Charlottesville and say it's 100 skinheads that started this. It's not. It's tens of thousands on the left, on the progressive side of things, that are to blame for this.
Well, you're speaking to someone on the left.
I know.
And
now,
I agree with you. I would go further. It's not that AOC and the squad are pandering. They're leading.
That's what I mean.
Yes.
But we were fine with it, and so was corporate America. They were part and parcel.
Jay, let me ask you this, though. There are only 3 weeks left of school here. Yeah. If you are not successful in terms of getting the entire campus back to campus, effectively, which does seem hard given the fact that they're going to have police there till May 17th. I don't know what's going to happen with this hybrid program in terms of having people on campus, off campus. Do you imagine looking for monetary damage? I know you say you're not now. I know there are other lawyers who are watching right now. I just got an email from one saying, this is a fascinating lawsuit. We should bring, well, I don't want to say they're saying they should bring it against another school. How do you see the actual litigation going? And do you actually see monetary damages given the fact that it is a breach of contract lawsuit based on the idea that the student paid a certain amount of money to be able to go to school?
Yeah. So,
what kind of damages could be on top of the tuition? Are you looking for? Would you be looking for tuition reimbursement plus punitive damage? I mean, how does that work?
Well, let's think about this. You're a parent. You send your kid to Columbia, and they've worked their whole lives for it. You're spending a huge amount of money for the semester. This isn't COVID where they were just off campus with everybody else. They're under a hostile environment where they're under attack and they're scared to go to the university. How much would you pay for that? Right. Send your kids there? Zero. So there's certainly damages in this case. We don't want that to be the focus. The focus, at least short term, is that we want to restore some sort of adult voices to this. And if we do turn this into a damage case, it's going to remain pro bono.
Do you think the University of Florida historically will be viewed positively, or the way that it was handled down there? Because in this case, I think you're going to hear police brutality. If that tack had been taken with some of these previous demonstrations, not this one, not what's happening now, but if you were as heavy-handed as University of Florida was, there would have been pushback. Pick your demonstration over the last 5-10 years.
It depends on the demonstration, right? If it's right wing, then people say that's terrific. If it's left wing, then for some reason there's an exception. Right. The second a protest turns violent and ugly, which is what's happened, the second you've got protesters who are calling for terrorist attacks on America. The idea that anybody would tolerate that, let alone negotiate with them, which is what you've got schools like Northwestern doing. What are your lists of demands? We're happy to accede to them. Right. All that does is it leads to more and more of the same.
Jay, I want to thank you for coming in. Please keep us updated on your progress with the lawsuit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next on Squawk Pod, Election Day is about 6 months away. Will we see a Trump presidency 2.0? Jim VandeHei of Axios is looking ahead.
If he has a government that will carry out his wishes, he's going to be able to do a hell of a lot more than he did in his first term. You might like that, you might loathe that, but you should at least be aware of it.
You're listening to Squawk Pod.
Our next guest is Jim VandeHei. He's the co-founder of two media companies, first Politico and now Axios, where he is the CEO. He has written a new book. It's out this week, and it's titled Just the Good Stuff. And we're going to talk about that book. There's about a whole number of lessons about life that you've learned that you're trying to pass on. I want to ask you about some of those things, but I want to ask you a little bit about D.C. for a second, some of the things you've been writing about in Axios. In particular, this Time magazine interview that Trump just gave, you said is one of the most important interviews you think that's out there that we can take something away from. It is long. It's long, that interview. And I'm curious, what was the nugget or the sentence or two or three that you said to yourself, that is something we're supposed to focus on?
Well, one, we have two candidates who are basically operating like they're in the witness protection program in terms of like getting really tough scrutiny around like what are you going to actually do when you govern? And for Trump, this was like a really detailed conversation where he said the quiet part out loud. I think what people are not paying attention to in the noise is he has like very substantial plans for governance. And it's a lot different than what we're used to. It's different than his first term. We've done a lot of reporting on it. The Times has done a lot of reporting on it. But it's the first time he's talked about, hey, listen, I'm going to use the military. I'm going to use the National Guard to quell protest or to deport people who are here illegally. I'm going to potentially get rid of people at the Justice Department if they don't agree with me. Very significantly, we've known from his staff and from on the outside that they want to get rid of potentially tens of thousands of civil servants who they feel just weren't loyal enough to him last time. On the outside, you have the Heritage Foundation and others putting together a lot of work to make sure that functions that way. And if you look back at that first term, he was really hamstrung by the fact that a lot of people weren't loyal to him and didn't actually want to carry out his wishes. So if he has a government that will carry out his wishes, he's going to be able to do a hell of a lot more than he did in his first term. You might like that, you might loathe that, but you should at least be aware of it.
He was hamstrung by a lot of things in his first term. I mean, it was Crossfire Hurricane. That was before he even won. They had a plan to disrupt, and I don't know, just there were obstacles from day one for everything.
Including from him, right? Like he appointed a lot of people.
That's the new information.
And that's what he wants to do. And in that interview, he's pretty candid. Even though he's hard when he interviews because he's all over the place, but he's pretty candid about these things that they really would stretch norms, traditions, and kind of accepted law. And again, a lot of Republicans like that. That's great, but now it's at least detailed.
What do you think the impact will be on business leaders that you talk to about those type of things?
I think there's a real divide, as you've seen on your own show. I think on the one hand, people feel like, listen, I'm probably going to get lower taxation, maybe better regulation, but the trade-off is there's probably a lot more volatility and unpredictability. I don't think business is that thrilled with what they've seen from Biden. I don't think they like the amount of spending that we've seen, the threats to raise the capital gains rate. So I think there's a real divide. There's a reason that President Biden's sending Treasury Secretary Yellen out to Arizona today for the Treasury Secretary to warn about the attacks on democracy, because they feel like that, not the issues, is what would get him reelected. Biden, I'm talking about. They feel like for whatever reason, people don't like what he's selling in terms of the policies that he's had, and they really want to make it kind of, hey, here's some stability versus like a real attack on democracy.
Policies that nobody likes.
Pardon?
Instead of just altering the policies that nobody likes, let's just talk about
doubling
something
down
else.
on those.
Yeah, for what I mean, again, if you just look at what he promised to do, he did a lot policy-wise. It just turns out the public doesn't like it, and you've seen it in the unfavorable ratings, which have been consistent and persistent since the day that he took office. So he has to figure out something that shakes up that
What is
dynamic.
it that you think, from all the reporting that Axios has done, that the public doesn't like? Is it the policies? Is it the age issue? Is it the inflation piece of the economy? What is it that when you say they don't like the policies?
Yeah.
What do you think what are you referring to specifically?
Yeah, I think you're probably, again, it's hard to know because we're talking about 330 million people, but I think it's a combination of people are very uncomfortable with his age, right? He looks old. He often sounds old, and then you look at polls where even Democrats are really concerned about it. So they hate this topic, but it is true. He is old, and he would be 86 at the end of his term. I think you couple that with inflation, and then some bit of nostalgia. Like people look back at Trump and they're like, I didn't like. He might have said crazy things, but I don't know. It seemed like my taxes were lower and I was making more money. In some cases that's right, some cases it's not. But when you look at poll after poll after poll that says people feel that there was more success in the economy under Trump than under Biden, you can see why the White House gets worried and says, okay, then we have to figure out a different juxtaposition. We have to say stability versus crazy. And that's kind of what they're trying to say over and over and over.
Right.
That's why you have the Treasury Secretary wading into democracy politics. It's just not, you don't typically do that, and the White House is admitting you don't typically do that.
If the way your weekly budget is measuring up to what you make is still below where it was when he took office.
Yep.
And inflation comes down to 3% on top of the 20% or whatever number you want to use, depending on what you're talking about, and your wage gains have not kept pace with inflation, you feel strapped. You don't feel better off than you did 3 years ago.
And so take your thing. So where is Biden losing support? Put aside young people because they don't really vote. They're really worried about black men and Hispanic men, especially working class black men and Hispanic men. They've been moving to the Republican Party over the last 4 years, and that's who's getting hit hardest are people, working class people, by inflation. So then, therefore, you can extrapolate inflation probably is a bigger deal than even we realize.
I want to talk about this book because there's a whole bunch of things in here that I I'm fascinated by, but I'm curious, and they're life lessons that you're trying to teach. One of them, though, is this. You say, study thyself, be clear-eyed about your gifts and flaws.
Yep.
It's the only path to betterment.
Yep.
How many people do you know who are not that introspective, who have no idea what their gifts and their flaws really are? And to the extent that you can tell those people how to figure it out, what do you tell them?
I mean, most don't. I mean, that big part of so the book was written, I started a couple of media companies, Politico and Axios, and I was a reporter, as you know, before that. So I took a lot of notes. And like one of the things in just realizing who has success and not is that one question. Like, are you doing any introspection? What are you good at? What aren't you good at? How do you spend your day? What type of people do you surround yourself with? What do you do when you work with a jerk? Do you let them in your life? Do you keep them in your life? How do you deal with someone when you have to fire them? There's a way to do it with grace. There's a way to do it and be a real jerk. And a lot of this stuff, I make fun of myself a lot in the book because I had to learn to be a CEO. And in learning to be a CEO, in the beginning, hiring, firing, strategic decisions, communicating, culture, I screwed it all up. But then I do a lot of introspection, and I'm like, okay, I screwed that up. How do I fix it? And in fixing it, I looked at other people who had success. So in many ways, the book is me being a vessel in terms of like, here, listen, if you're a manager and you want to be a better manager, here's a bunch of tricks and tips that are very actionable. If you're a CEO and you want to deal with the younger generation, here's some things that will help you. And if you're a college graduate and you're trying to figure out how do you get ahead and not be a jerk, I think there's a lot in the book that would be really helpful.
For the audience, the CEO crowd, many of whom are watching, they all complain about trying to deal with younger people in their office. What is the single trick you'd give them?
Stop rolling your eyes and stop whining about it. Like, it is what it is. Most of your workforce happens to be under the age of 40. They're not motivated by what we were motivated by. We got into the workforce and we wanted a paycheck and we didn't want our boss to hit us. They want purpose. They want meaning. Well, then you have to give them at least some purpose and meaning. In everything, every job, there is purpose and meaning. Either a company does something well, they treat their employees well. Emphasize the hell out of that, and you will get just as good a productivity as you got from us. But if you resist it and you pretend we don't live in a diverse country, if you pretend that they're not motivated by different factors, you're only going to suffer. There's so many things that I see CEOs talk about that to me strike me as totally delusional. This idea, I'm going to make everyone come back 5 days a week, and damn it, they will. Really? You're trying to get the most talented people who've decided to move to Austin and San Jose and other cities, and you're just going to say, I'm not going to compete for that talent because I have to have everybody in the office every single day? Strikes me as crazy because we don't have that big of a workforce, especially in the professional class.
I'm going to send you to lunch with Jamie Dimon. The book is called Just the Good Stuff. Thank you very much for coming in this morning. Congratulations on the book. It's nice to see you. And Mike Allen, who is your partner in crime, joined you off stage this morning. Thanks.
That's Squawk Pod for today. Thank you for listening, as always. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. You can tune in to CNBC weekday mornings at 6 a.m. Eastern. You can stream on Peacock Morning News Live, and you can listen anytime when you follow Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts. We'll meet you back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.